So this is Cost Conscious Board Game Design. I am Paul Bender. I'm one of the founding members and CEO of Greater Than Games. And
I'm Josh Gippens. I'm the North American Sales Director for Czech Games Edition.
so this panel basically grew out of a panel we were on at PAX East, where we were just talking about the board game industry in general, and like, if you're a board game designer and you want to publish a game, it was a Q&A panel kind of thing. And after it, we wound up having like a 20-minute mini like Q&A in the hall, where people were asking questions about things that people don't talk about a lot, I guess,
Right.
which is like if you're designing a game. So a lot of people talk about, I'm designing a board game, I want to pitch it to a publisher. How do I pitch it to the publisher? What are they looking for in a game? That kind of stuff in general. How do you get a publisher to talk to you? Those are all like things people talk about.
Yeah.
That's good, useful, right? But something else that's very relevant to us as publishers that people don't really think about all the time is when you're designing a game, how does the design of the game, specifically the components that you're thinking of having in the game, how does that impact the publisher and the likelihood that the publisher is going to sign it, and how many copies you're going to sell, and things like that? So
I agree.
yeah. So we wanted to talk about that a bit.
Yeah.
And we're going to mostly run it as kind of a Q&A kind of thing. I do, like, my core thing I do at Greater Than Games, one of the core things I do relevant to this is do all the production management and the actual, like, working with factories and pricing out stuff like that on that end. And I know that Josh does a lot of, like, the marketing, like...
Yeah, so I sell to distribution and mass market and deal with the stores and outlets that will get your games to the end user. So I'm more on the MSRP side of things, but that works closely with production because that number predicates this number, determines how many units we're projecting to sell based on final cost.
Right. And all of this really is, for once you get to like a company that's like a fairly sophisticated game publisher, even if they're not super big, it's really all math, right? So when you make a game, when you present a game, there's like a certain price that it costs to make that game per unit, right? And then once you know that price, that automatically determines what your MSRP is going to be. And then what the MSRP is automatically determines, or strongly influences how many copies you're going to sell, what stores will pick it up,
Right.
all that kind of stuff. So it all flows through mathematically. And so that's why it all starts with what's in your game.
And there will always be anomalies, and when we're talking about this stuff, you're going to think, well, what about this game that cost $1 billion and it's super hot and sold a ton of copies? There are always anomalies to all of these equations, so this is kind of the baseline, and you hope you get that extra spike.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess I'll talk just a little bit about a broad overview of a few things that are, like, these things are actually, like, inexpensive versus these things are majorly expensive components, so if you want to have them in a game, like, it's going to drive your price up a lot. I'll just talk about that for a little bit, and I can just talk a little bit about, like, the different price points and
Right.
like
After they make it, and then I need to sell it, I'll talk about some of the stuff that I go through to determine projections and forecasting for manufacturing and what I need for inventory to sell.
Right, and then we'll just have a Q&A, and so it'll be mostly kind of your questions, and we'll kind of go off of that. So to start out, when we're talking about manufacturing side of things, in general, as a general rule, the things that make board games very, very expensive are things that are labor intensive, because labor actually is quite expensive. You're manufacturing overseas in China almost exclusively, but still the labor rate is still quite expensive. So anything that is labor intensive is going to drive up the cost. And that includes anytime you have to have something assembled, the more like little bits go in there that someone has to hand assemble in a tray or put into an envelope, or if you're making a legacy type of game, all of the different, each individual like envelope you have to sort things out into, that's going to drive up the cost. We've made games where we have a tray with punch-out tokens, where the tokens have to be pre-punched in order to fit into it. The labor of pre-punching those tokens drives up the cost. So if you have like something where the punch board comes on sprues that are still just where it was punched out of the sheet, much less expensive than pre-punched stuff. So that's one really good rule of thumb. Another thing is that anytime you require tooling of any kind, that's going to drive up the costs unless you do a massive, massive print run. So the classic example of this is anything that's injection molded plastic. You've got to pay for those molds, but then if you print tons of them, you get economies of scale and you can amortize that off over all of the units. But each mold costs an amount. So a game that has tons of plastic figures but all one sculpt is a lot cheaper than a game that has many different sculpts.
Yeah,
With one figure.
100 figures of one design is infinitely cheaper than one figure
Yeah.
It's 100 different designs.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that, and even though you might have the same number of plastic pieces, yeah, that game with like 100 sculpts, each one unique, is going to be enormously, like, you can't make that game expensive versus like, oh, you could put 100 like of the exact same little plastic in a game. Sure, okay, that will work. Yeah, and then other things that get into tooling are things, anything that's dice. When you're dealing with dice, if the dice are custom, then that is much more expensive, like custom sides, custom engraving on the sides, that is much more expensive than if they're standard off-the-shelf dice. Getting down into the details of that a little bit more, and if people have any questions about details of this, I can go into more things like, would this be more, would that be less? But screen printing on the side of dice is much cheaper than engraving them, than custom engraving them or custom molding them. And the same thing goes for other components. Stuff that's off the shelf kind of, or that factories are already making, is always going to be less expensive than something that's custom because they don't have to do new tooling for it. So a good example of those is like little meeples or little like cubes or anything made of wood that is a kind of a standard that you see in a lot of games. Those are definitely cheaper than other things that are not. There's a lot of little games out there that have little like translucent plasticky crystals that are all like suspiciously similar. If there's a factory that makes those, right? And so that's why they'll do that stuff. So those kind of things. So that's kind of the overview for me, and I can delve into a lot more details if you have specific questions about like how I would analyze that stuff. So
how do the economies of scale work with the dice engraving versus miniatures?
So they also it's going to have the same kind of economies of scale. So if you're like, I would like to have I've got a custom die type, right? And I would like a fair number of these, but they're all going to be exactly the same. It's the same mold, and then they're going to be doable. Whereas if you're going to have 12 dice in a game, they're custom dice, but they're all the same. Oh, that's probably okay. If you're going to have 12 different designs of dice, that game is going to be mighty expensive. Yeah.
So then basically after they go through the production and determining costs and things like that, we actually work together during this process to determine the sales price, what I want to sell it to in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And the lower you can get that price point, obviously the better. There is a big jump between a $30 game and a $40 game as far as the consumer is concerned, and there is a significant drop off in the number of units that I will sell between a $30 game and a $40 game. So while they're doing the production, the manufacturing, we know what the multipliers are that bring it up to the MSRP. Like, well, is there a way we can get it down to 30? Let's talk about that. Okay, maybe instead of 12 unique dice, is there a thing that we can do where maybe there's 2 each of 6 unique dice or something like that? Maybe the card stock is this size instead of that size, or maybe there are a different type of plastic chips instead of those plastic chips, or are wood cubes cheaper than plastic cubes? So we go through all of those iterations to get that price, because I want it to be the right price for the right game. And actually there is a such thing as a game being too cheap, because now people will perceive there's no value in the game. Oh, it's only $8 or it's only $10. There's not going to be much there. And there are a lot of great games that exist that are $10 and they've sold tons, but I'm sure many of you have gone to the store, picked it up and like $10 can't be that good. So there's also a balancing act on the other side where I want to put value in there. So instead of cheaping out on components, I might say, hey, can we get custom dice? Can we get unique figures? What's that going to do to our price? And I'll assess the marketplace and when I think we're going to move and say, well, it's worth the jump in quality because the difference in units sold is not going to be that impactful, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And something else that I'm sure you can speak to is like, it depends on what your target demographic and target retailers for a game are. So if you've got a game that like, this is only core hobby, this is a big heavy game that's only core hobby, I'm only going to sell it in core hobby stores, then an $80 game now in the current market is like, that's doable. That's a thing that people will buy, right? But if you're going to go into Target, that is a completely different market. Completely
Not
different.
happening.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where like Target, I know, really prefers a $25 to $30 price point.
They went 30 and under, and with hobby stores, a $40, $50, $60, $70, $80 game is much more commonplace in the market, and that's where you start to look at, well, this game's cool at 50, but how much cooler can it be at 60? Like, what awesome things can we do? Because we're much less price sensitive to that in the core hobby market between 50 and 60, because the number of units sold are going to be marginally different versus the value and the bang for your buck that you get in that $60 game with all the cool miniatures, all the cool dice, all the cool tokens, all the extra stuff. So we want to try to pump that up, which actually in the end sells more units because now it's more perceived value, more people are playing it, more people have it out. So you can actually get increase in sales by making the game a premium experience instead of cheaping out and going the other route.
Right. Yeah. And something that at least we've experienced talking to a lot of retailers. So we do, when we're looking into a game and looking at what we're going to do, especially if for a core hobby game, we speak with a lot of like large core hobby retailers and what sells. And something that we've at least been told and experienced from them is that for them, they care like if you bump up $10 price increments, there's no point in bumping up less than a $10 price increment because people don't distinguish the prices in a market.
Yeah,
so
45 and 50 is
the
same
price.
thing.
Right, exactly.
Same thing.
Right. And in fact, what I've been told recently from a bunch of retailers is that once you get to 60, you start bumping up 20.
Yeah,
it doesn't make it.
It's 60, 80, 100.
Right. Because at that point, it's enough money that people, like it's all this mental accounting kind of thing, but people are thinking, how many 20s will it take to pay for this? And if it's going to take me 4 20s to pay for it, like it doesn't matter if it's $70 or $80, it's all the same price, that's 4 20s, you know? And so then we'll make decisions there where sometimes we'll have a thing like, okay, like my formulas would tell me that this game would be a $70 game. I'll either bump the MSRP to 80 and do anything that we can to make it feel even more premium, kind of, basically, and that actually sells better. So, yeah. And some good tricks, as one final thing, some good tricks on the side. I talked a little bit about things like, these are very expensive and they'll make your game really expensive. There's a few things that are not terribly expensive. This is sort of a secret. Things that are not terribly expensive from a manufacturing standpoint that increase the perceived quality of the game a lot. And things, for example, like that are spot foil and UV kind of coatings on stuff like that are like, they're more expensive.
Is everybody familiar with like the spot UV coating stuff? So it's like where part of the box might have a matte finish in the light, and then there's highlights that are shiny.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, this is cool when it turns in the light.
Yeah. It's sweet looking.
Yeah, and it feels good.
Yeah. But it's not super expensive.
But it looks awesome.
Yeah.
So again, that perceived value of how can we make this, we have this much more room to go, but we're adding this much more value.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing that is like a bit more expensive, but is like not, but it's definitely like more perceived value than cost, generally speaking, is if you've got a bunch of miniatures that are really nicely sculpted, plastic miniatures, doing a wash on them at the factory makes them really pop and look really nice. And if you're doing all of the washes for your miniature, this is one of those economies of scale again. If you've got a ton of miniatures, but they're all the same color wash, you can actually do that. It's pretty affordable.
And the wash is just, they kind of dip it in like
Right.
a shadowing agent, so you kind of see some more of the detail. So instead of a greatly detailed gray blob, there's a cool detailed miniature, and you can see the shapes and the crevices of the fabric and stuff because the wash is on there, differentiating the light of the miniature.
And again, this is all labor. You think about that, like if it's all the same color, like we got 100 miniatures, but you're going to run them all through, just all pop them in a bucket and scoop them out again. It's all the same color ink or whatever. That's not as expensive as like each one of these is a red wash and a blue wash and a green wash. Well, that's going to get it. All right. Anyway, yeah.
So I've recently been concerned about getting more people into gaming as a hobby. Because for myself, my entry was largely done by White Wolf and their Perfect Bound books for $20 at Walmart books back in the 90s. I don't see that anymore. I see $50 books and like out on the floor, an entry set into a game is going to be $70 to $80 to $90.
Mm-hmm.
So what are manufacturers thinking about future gamers? How are they trying to aim products at 15, 16, 17-year-olds who aren't, economically speaking, doing very well right now?
So when you talk about RPGs specifically, there is such a broad market, and a lot of those higher end books they're designed to people that want to get into the hobby and they're ready to spend the dollars. Now, from a publishing standpoint, I'm not in the RPG side. We don't print those, but I'm friends with people at many RPG companies. So a lot of times what you'll see now is you'll see the starter boxes with like a $20 to $30 price point entry. It's not the full experience. It's a bite-sized sample. There's enough to start playing, usually through a couple of levels of character design. It is a streamlined process and a streamlined system that they give you, but that's enough to see in the RPG world if you like this campaign, and then I want to move on and spend $50 for the core book, $50 for the GM book, $40 for the setting supplement, $30 for all of our miniatures and dice and all that other stuff. So there are products out there that do that, but what you're saying without naming names of RPGs, popular RPG that everybody loves right now, like those books do cost a lot, which is why they moved and made a $20 starter box. So I think you're seeing more starter box than $20, here's a book.
Yeah. That is exactly. We just finished. We're about to start publishing an RPG, and we just did like a lot of market research over the course of the last 18 months, trying to figure out exactly how to position those products in the market to sell the best. And all of the feedback that we've gotten says almost exactly the same thing that Josh just said. What you want is a $20 starter kit and a $50 full color core rule book. And in fact, if you have that core rule book cheaper, the perceived value is lower. People won't think your RPG is as good.
Right. That's another thing that
Right.
comes back to perceived value.
Mhm.
That's why
Yeah.
the core book's $50, but it has the UV coating on
Right.
it, has the nice feel, and you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is awesome.
Exactly.
I want this.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of role-playing books I pick up, and I'm just like, I just want to buy this thing because it's awesome. And they did
Yeah.
a great job producing it. But I know what goes into it.
Yeah.
Like, I want to spend $80 on this
Yeah.
Cthulhu Britannica box set. Like, I want this thing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like you said, the perceived value of those books, because of those premium finishes, drives that price. But also, like what I said in the beginning, if it's too low, well, it can't be very good.
Yeah.
Why are they only selling this great campaign setting for $20? Like, there must be something wrong with it, which is not the greatest thing in the world, but it exists. So it's not that the price is artificially inflated, it's they're adding the content
Right.
to drive that price. Because when you look at those rule books, they're usually beautiful full color artwork. And imagine every piece of art in that art book had to be made by
Right.
somebody. They had to pay somebody for it. So
Right.
they're choosing to go do that, to add that premium content, even with just your regular starter book, because people will consume that and they want that, and it's a nice piece to look at. How many of you have flipped through your DM guide or through your player guide just to look at it and like read stuff? I do it all the time.
I haven't done something like that since
Yeah.
I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
So, so for me, your premium experience value isn't there anymore.
Right. And
I prefer just text with maybe
And there
index and
are-
outline so I can get to what I need.
And there are things that are available through PDF format now or download format now where you can get that without paying the full price, and it's a different experience and a different consumable. But the marketplace is being driven
Yeah.
by the market, and if
Right.
that's what the majority of the market is seeing and sales are there, it's going to stay relevant.
And that's
Part
what-
of my concern is, and that, I've seen a lot of premium stuff get pushed out into the marketplace. And, to my mind, it's kind of doing a class segregation almost. If you can afford to get into gaming, this is where you're going now, instead of trying to say, let's make sure everybody can get into gaming.
Well, the one thing that Josh mentioned too, I want to echo that I forgot to mention too. Another thing that's driving that is the fact that PDFs exist in the internet. So like in the 90s, if you wanted to do that, if you wanted to get in and you only had $20 to spend on a book, they had to make a book that was $20 for you to get into it, right? Now, if you're a serious, like traditional, like big RPG company, you basically have to sell PDFs of all of your things, and you will sell PDFs. It's correct to do so. And those PDFs are always in that price point that you remember from the 90s for a book. So people now that like either can't afford or don't know for sure if they want to get into a thing, they buy the PDF. And then what the book is for those people that want the premium physical artifact experience to look through. And so that's, I believe, actually why that's happened, why you've seen that happen, like in general in the market, is because PDFs exist and people can get like $10 or $20, they can get the whole core rule book, right? Then that's driven the price of the actual physical core rule book up. Because if I can get the PDF, why would I get a core rule book? Like, what's the point, right? And the reason why is, it's awesome. So that's kind of what's happening.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, because I had the same experience. I got into RPGs in the '90s too when they were like that, and like I've seen this kind of thing happen over the course of time. I think it's very interesting, but I'm quite certain that it's that.
And to continue down that line a little bit, I think another thing that we've seen and that I've noticed, I mean, I've been gaming for years and years, like almost 30 years now. People are more likely to have these things on display, like on a bookcase or a shelf. So instead of like a paperback thing, like the premium experience, like I don't care if people come in my house and see all of my RPG books or all of my real big premium game boxes. Like, it's not a status symbol, say, but it's like, it's not a thing that you're like tucking away in a drawer in the spare bedroom anymore.
Right.
So I think that more and more people this is beautiful. Look at this collection of things that I have,
Yeah.
and having that stuff look nice when it's out. People are proud of it and want to have that. And a lot of times people come and like, hey, what's that? I'm like, oh, that's like the setting guide for this world. And I take it out. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, I thought it was like an atlas. I'm like,
Right.
well, it
Yeah.
is, but not of a place you've ever been.
with the like new setup of where there seems to be a lot of games out that use like cards as a mechanic.
Yeah.
As long as you own said pictures and stuff, does changing the text and adding different pictures tend to increase the cost of making it, or because you're basically just printing out sheets of a whole bunch of cards, it's not going to modify your cost all that much?
Could you clarify? I'm trying to see what you're.
Would it be is it better if your card mechanic has repeats of the same card versus lots of
Okay. So from a printing perspective, it doesn't matter at all, right? So like, because you're just doing sheets, right? It's just like you send a giant file to the printer, and they're gonna go right, and then they're gonna like send it through a slicer that goes and slices them this way. And it, like if you have 500 cards and literally everyone is different, it is the same price as 500 identical cards from a printing perspective. The added cost is art. Really? Yeah.
The art and then the assembly.
Yes, exactly, and assembly. Right.
So if you need all of these cards to be divided up into like 17 spaces in your box and like make sure that they come out that way, the labor.
Oh, then the labor will get you. But if you're like, I have 500 different cards, each one has different words on them. The words are in a super cool font and there's neat graphic design around them, but like the graphic design is pretty much the same on all of them. It's only the words that are different. They don't really need unique art, maybe just a little bit of icons. There's 500 different ones, but I don't care if they're all like, when you open the game, they're just like bundled in a brick of 500 cards and the people have to sort them out. That's not very expensive.
Yeah, there are games out there that do
Yeah,
that.
it's like cutting them up and having like individual decks there.
Yes,
because
right,
they're all similar colors.
Right.
They probably wouldn't be as much as like, because this set is just going into these boxes. These ones are
Yeah.
The more things they have to touch, do, or separate at the factory, the more your cost goes up.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's their labor, and then it's also the error rate. So like if you've got a machine that is taking 500 cards, going boom, 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 and shrink wrapping them all in a pile, and then the player who buys this sorts them out into all the decks, your error rate's going to be much lower. And so that is also like, as a publisher, like I don't have to send like replacement cards out as much, so it makes the game easier to publish.
Yes, you mentioned art there. Where does art fall on the perceived value spectrum for an investment?
So from my perspective, and you're going to speak to this too, this is another thing that really depends on the game type and things like that. So getting good art can be expensive, and so it is definitely going to drive the price up, but it also definitely increases the perceived value. Like that is the kind of thing that for me, like you get what you pay for. Like yes, the perceived value is how much money I spent on it. Yeah.
So with art in games, obviously art is subjective. And we have all seen games that we think look incredible, and we have all seen games that we think look not incredible. There was somebody at some point in the line that thought that art looked really great, and it got put on the box. Or maybe they were hindered by budget and got what they paid for. Art can definitely hurt you. Art can also help you. I've played a lot of games that I have not enjoyed that much that had amazing art. I have played a lot of games that I love, and the art is, in my opinion, not great at all. On the shelf, the box, the art can definitely help some. Every step that you have to go through to have somebody enjoy it is another hindrance in your way. So if it's bad art, bad sorting, because like I just want to open the box and for it to be there, and then I have to struggle through the bad rule book and then get to the gameplay mechanics. I'm like, oh, actually, this game's amazing. But I had to go through so many bad experiences to get there. But if it has great art and the company spent a little bit of money, so it's easy for me to open up and do, the rule book's really nice and laid out and like clean, and I can figure out what I'm doing really well, then the art's great and the gameplay is great, that's a positive experience all the way around. But back to the art thing, it's all subjective. Like, I want all of our games to have great art. Do I think all of them have amazing art? No, I do not. But different art is for different people, and some people will come and tell me, even with their own games, like, man, I love this. I'm like, I'm so glad that you do. I'm so happy that you enjoy our games.
Speaking in equations, what like percent of a budget would you put into art?
We try to spend what we think makes the art look good. My company is a little bit different, so when we publish a game or manufacture a game or go to print a game, I don't say I'm just going to say a number. I don't say we have $50,000 to develop and get art and assets and do that. That's not how my company works.
That's not how we work either.
I didn't figure that was how they worked either. There are some companies that are restricted because they don't have titles that are able to support other projects and starting companies, and it's a totally legitimate way to approach it and say, you know what, I've got 10 grand, I'm gonna do the best I can to do whatever I need to do, and I would say pay the people for what you want, whether it's your rulebook writer, your artist, your graphic designer, whatever. But allocate that into the places that you can to get the most bang for your buck.
Aside from the quality of art, do you see variety of art mattering a lot? Like if you have cards that all have the same or very similar pictures on them versus cards that have.
So, for games that I've seen or experienced or played, I think it depends on what that game is doing.
Yeah.
So if I am a faction and all of my things are similar because I'm this faction of whatever, in my mind, I kind of want all that to be similar.
Right.
But if the game is representing a myriad of options, I want that art to be different so I don't get confused. Oh, this green character kind of looks like that green
Right.
character, but your thing does something way different than my thing. So making it make sense visually to the mechanics, I think, also plays into it.
I've specifically seen actually, just looking at, because I periodically do research about this kind of thing too. It's just what people's feedback is in the marketplace. Look at GG comments or anywhere else on the internet, look at reviews, talk to retailers and see what sells. And there's been a few games in the history of me looking at it that I've seen where people specifically talked about this issue and it hurt the game. It hurt the game because you had cards that you needed to distinguish, like, oh, this is different, like, these are different characters, or like this character changes into this character, changes into this character, but they chose to put the exact same art on all of those, and it makes the game look and feel cheap when it in people's minds, perceived value-wise. In that specific case, where like obviously these are different and they should be different, and like I can totally imagine like how the art should be different on all of them, and yet they use exactly the same art. That doesn't. Whereas if you've got like, this is my army, and these are all like, this is my cool soldier guy, and I've got 20 of them. Well, if all the art's the same on them, like, oh, obviously,
They're all generic soldiers.
Yeah.
Of course all the
They
art's
should
the
be
same.
the
Nobody
same,
cares
right.
about them. But
Yeah,
your
yeah.
leader, you don't want to be the same as your shoulders, so you want that art to be something cool and unique.
Yeah, exactly. So it really ties into the function and design of the game. They've got to be coupled, right? Like the art has to be, whatever you do with the art must be appropriate to what the mechanics of the game is.
Just like on that same vein, do you guys look at people with color vision issues and how they can still play the game?
We always do. So specifically, actually, Trevor, who's back there doing videography, did an independent contract for us, and we will have him. He has color vision issues, and we'll have him review games all the time to make sure that we're not doing stuff. So we always take that into it.
Yeah, and we tried to in the past. I know, like, we were using the standard red, yellow, blue, green, stuff like that. So, and now that it has become more prevalent of a topic of discussion for game design, we try to run those things through different filters. And no matter what filters you run it through, there's always going to be one of those that is difficult to get around. And we try to also, a lot of games will try to address those issues with symbols along with the colors.
Yeah.
So green might have a triangle in it, where red has a circle. So you try to do things game design wise to help make those differences as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, but you had a question.
I'm just following up with the same one. So
Oh.
if there's no particular value
Yeah.
to different art, then it doesn't increase perceived value. If there's no value, you don't have any good reason that you need to make the back of the cards different or the order of the cards different. If it's very slight and not really functional with the game.
Generally speaking, then like in those situations, like sometimes it can actually like be confusing if you have too much different, like if you have visual differentiations for things that don't have a mechanical differentiation, that's also bad.
Or it might be on a variation of the game, but maybe you just need the game.
Yeah,
There's a-
Right.
For the art, with game design, with function, with all of those things, there's a bunch of sliders,
Yeah.
basically. And you're like, well, what if we do all different art? Well, mechanically, that makes it very confusing.
Yeah.
But what if they're all the same? Well, they're all generic soldiers, so that's pretty cool there.
Yeah.
But what does it do to these other sliders
Yeah.
too? So it's a balance between all of those. So really, instead of just saying, yes, you want all different art for all of your cards, you need to weigh that and measure it with all of the other parts of the design to make sure that they work in harmony.
Speaking of colorblind, are there any other disabilities or aspects that you've seen come up in recent times that you are starting to have to address in game design and development to accommodate other gamers?
Non-specifically for us, no.
Yeah, I can't think of any right now, but I might be forgetting something that just is like, oh yeah, obviously we do that. I'm trying to, yeah, not that I can think of.
There's someone I follow on Twitter that do like an accessibility review of every game.
Mhm.
So they say if someone is physically handicapped, how well can they enjoy this game?
Right,
If
yeah.
they're deaf, if they're blind, are they still able to enjoy it and rate the games on that scale? It's a
Yeah.
really interesting one
Yeah.
because like something like I think Race for the Galaxy, if you have some visual issues or whatever, there's no differentiation between the 4 different colors of worlds you can make.
Yeah.
And so it's not as easy.
Yeah, some games can definitely be more challenging depending on what the situation is. So
Yeah.
we just try to design the best games that we can and hope that the most people as possible can enjoy them. And then when those issues are brought to us or those concerns are brought to us, we can look at that and take that feedback and design into the future for them.
The one thing that is sort of related to that we have done, that occurred to me, is that we have a game that involves real-time dice rolling, and which is like fun in general and thematic for the game and things like that. And some people some people just like prefer not to do that, and also some people have like movement issues and things like that where that is hard to do, and so we have an alternate rule set specifically to make it non-real-time based for that particular game. So that's kind of related to that, I guess.
Yes. Speaking of sliders, I know as someone who, is a consumer and loves the shiny, fancy, premium stuff, I love, really thick chipboard punch-outs and like really thick cardstock, premium air cushion finishes.
Mhm.
How do you decide when to upgrade components to be higher quality bits like that? And how much do those kind of quality improvements ultimately affect the price of the game?
So for us in particular, that decision is made when we're looking for what our final price point is. So, and what the market is. So for a core hobby game, those matter, right? If a game is going to be like definitely core hobby, then we want to do that stuff. And that also fortunately means that the games can support a higher price point if they're going to be core hobby. And so those are all things that like, what we'll basically do is if I'm looking at making an $80 game, I will do as much of that stuff as I can possibly afford. Basically, and then depending which things, like look at the sliders, like what things I choose, like what things I prioritize when I'm looking at I can afford to do 7/8 of the things, those premium things. I look at the particular game, like what's going to give the most perceived value in this game, what kind of components do I have the most of, or are players going to interact with the most. So a game I will, if possible, when I've got a game where every player has like a big panel that like they're going to always have for the whole game and doing stuff with, I try to make that out of the thick punch board instead of cardstock if I can. If they're going to be interacting with it all the time.
And then those places are also where you want to say, oh, well, this is on the table all the time. They're
Yes.
always looking at it. Let's make sure the art looks really cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Make sure it really addresses the things we want to or conveys what we want to instead of like, well, it's just green.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas something that like this is like a rules aid that you'll use once in a while, or like a alternate scenario or alternate rules thing that'll sit over here, and they'll only be on the table sometimes, and the players won't directly interact with it all the time. They'll be over there to look at. Then maybe that can be cardstock. It'll still look nice. It's not like critical that's punchboard, And the other thing about punchboard stuff, the thick punchboard, that is a concern of mine, is not only the cost of the punchboard, but like the more of that takes up a lot more room in a box than cardstock. So now, am I going to make my box size bigger to the point where this is going to be hard to fit on a shelf for a retailer, and then they're going to be annoyed at me because I've got this big dumb box they can't put on a shelf, and then they're not going to sell it? These are real things we can
And it gets heavier.
Yeah.
And it costs more to send to you.
Right.
So again, slider.
Everything is
thick punch board, great miniatures, incredible artwork. Oh, price. Let me put that down here because now they get $200.
Yeah. The $200 game that cost me $50 to ship to you.
Not a good deal.
Well, that's a thing that exists.
Yes.
Just a quick follow-up on kind of quality perception. Do you think that if you do have a game where half the cards, because they're frequently used, are better card stock and have the air cushion finish, the other half are less commonly used, so they're cheaper and thinner, does that affect perception when players say, hang on a minute, how come these cards are different?
I would generally not do that for that reason.
Right.
Yeah. So if I'm going to have cards that are actually cards, I'm going to make them all in the same stock. The thing that
usually the differences that I've seen in games are, like you say, the sideboard. Here's a little information board over here.
Right. Exactly.
That might be the thin cardstock as opposed to the nice linen finish deck of cards that we're manipulating all the time. Oh, trade me this, or look, I'm going to play this card. I'm going to get this thing. You're working with those all the time because board games are very tactile. So the better those components are, that's where you want to put your money. Also in production, because I'm working with these all the time. If it's a figure that I just do that with, and that's it. Well, that doesn't need to be as amazing as all these cards that I'm playing with all the time.
Yeah, and honestly, like, and that, yeah, exactly. Anything that's not that I might make it out of cardstock, but it's not a card, right? Then sometimes that will be a choice to be like that. It's not super important that that is like super premium or something.
If your game, you've got it down so it's really just a deck of cards, maybe 70 cards, and you've been able to get to that point. But for example, you feel like you need a scoreboard. Obviously, trying to go that one extra component that's not your main one is going to be huge. Like, when do you say, you know what, they can make their own, just get a pad of paper and they'll be good on their own, or they'll steal some individual, like everybody needs one token. Well, okay, they'll steal it from another game. Like, when do you just say it's not worth it?
For me, if it's very important that that game is like $10, like for whatever reason, like I want to sell this in convenience stores or something like that, then I would do that. Otherwise,
Yeah, otherwise it goes to a $15 game, but oh, now there's a nice scoreboard, we all have little tokens, like, again, it becomes a perceived value add-on, and also, when the general consumer's buying the game, $10, like, what's wrong with this game, versus $15, but oh, look, it has this cool board, has some cool artwork on it, we all have our own tokens, and if adding that to the box pushes it to 15, like, the difference between 10 and 15 is not that great when you're getting those extra things. And it's probably easy to do in manufacturing. Then you look at things like the box size or whatever, and also there's tear pad options that you can do. So we did that in Codenames Duet, the mission maps. It's a pad of tear papers. And people are like, well, what about more? And it's like, well, you could laminate one, I guess, or like we have the files, you can print more, but usually it's not that expensive to throw a little tear pad of paper in there versus maybe printing out a board and doing a bunch of tokens and all this other stuff. So we'll look at that process as well for manufacturing, be like, well, what's it gonna cost? And sometimes you might be able to keep it at $10 and do this other thing instead.
some of you who are taking notes may have realized that when talking about prices, we just like violated the thing we said before, but because of the nuance that we went to. The prices that are relevant for selling are $5, $10, $15, $20, $30, $40, $50, $60, $80, $100.
Yeah, once you get to 20, you go up by 10.
Then you go up by 10. That's why I said 15. And 15 is a price you would sell something at, whereas 25 is not usually.
So you both have experience, quite a bit of experience with retail. Thinking about self-publishing through Kickstarter, how does that MSRP question change? Does it change? Is that a completely different marketplace?
What do you want to do with your game? Like,
do you just want to make a game because you wanted to make a game and get it to the market? That's a different conversation than I would love to see my game in stores eventually, picked up by a publisher or not, but on the market for a long time.
right. And there's a lot of really, like, all these answers are valid, totally great things to do with the game. And so, like, in my mind, like, your options are like, I print this game off to play with my friends. I kickstart the game so that I have enough copies that I can play with my friends, and like a few people that are really into my stuff on the internet have it, and then that's super cool to see that I have a game. I printed this game for that reason, but I hope that then after I kickstart it and show that there's some interest in it, I can sell it to a publisher who will like take it and reprint it and really make it available in stores. I want to kickstart this game to try to start my own board game company where I'm going to be selling it to distributors in general. So all of those things, totally valid, different answers. So,
What do you want to do?
which one do you want to know?
Somewhere between being able to sell to publishers and starting a company.
Okay.
Or yeah.
Right. So now you get into, you have a lot of things you have to worry about now. You've gotten into the have to worry about a lot of things range. So, the most important one overall here is the fact that if you're going to get it in stores, you're going to sell it to board game distributors. You're going to sell it to hobby distributors. Those hobby distributors will purchase it from you at 60% off MSRP and expect you to ship it to them for free all over the country. So if you can't make a profit doing that, that's not the thing you can do that.
Thin margins on that.
Right, yeah.
This might be slightly off topic depending on how you're looking at it, but I've noticed that games tend to be either 4 players or like 8 players, or basically like that. Is the amount of players more of a game balance issue or a selling issue?
In my opinion, from what I've seen, it's more a design point, and there are games for various different number of players, but also accessibility in the marketplace. There is, I think a lot of designers design with the 4 to 6 in mind. or 4 or 5 in mind. Kind of more than 5 leads to different design issue challenges, and there becomes a decreasing amount of games available beyond 6 players. 6 is not super popular, 7's less, 8 is less, more than 8 is like this much. Also, I think it's just the majority of what people are buying, and it's also the majority of what people have available to them to play in their group. Usually you can get 3 or 4 buddies together and play a game. If you have more than that, well, sometimes you just play 2 games. Or you try to find some of the larger games, or you're going to be doing something else. You're going to be at a barbecue, barbecuing, playing a 9-player game. So,
yeah. So a game that, in my experience, talking to retailers and doing stuff like this, a 2-player game that is exclusively 2 players is good. You can sell that all right. It'll sell more if you can have 3 or 4 players as an option. That definitely will get you more sales. And then there's decreasing value to adding players beyond that. Like I might push for a 5th player option, but after that, not care at all. But only if the game design lends itself to that, blah blah blah. Is true. If you don't have a 2-player version of it, that will hurt you as well. That will hurt you. If you have to have 3 players to play it, that will definitely hurt your sales.
even if people never play it 2-player,
Right.
it not being there
Have to have
is a
two
perceived
yes.
value issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Because even though I'm usually going to play with 3 or 4 or 5 players, well, there's sometimes that just Paul and I are going to
Yeah.
be together. Oh, well, I just can't even consider playing this game.
Right. And it restricts your options in the future and fills you with anxiety and makes you not want to play.
There seems to be a trend of solo play add-ons or rule changes being added to games.
Yes.
Do you guys see that a lot and coming up as a perceived value way to market the game?
There's a chunk, for me, there's a chunk of people that really care about that. And since we happen to publish a number of cooperative games, we get a larger percentage of people that care about that than maybe
Us not at all.
you do. Yeah, right. And so we definitely have there's this core group that cares, and I know that if a game can be fun and totally work as one player, I'll do it because I know I will make this chunk of several hundred people be happy, and they will buy it when they maybe wouldn't otherwise. But if it is too you gotta crowbar it in there awkwardly, it's not worth it. It's not that worth it.
Because then you'll get the negative effect.
Right.
Oh, it's here. And then when a couple of the solo player reviewers or whoever play it, they're like, well, what's it doing in there? It's no reason to be in here. And you've spent the time developing that solo
Right.
player option, printing out whatever extra special material you need for it, whether it's another player sheet or board or different rules or more pages in the rule book, all that stuff. So that's time and money spent forcing a thing that's not working.
Right.
And sometimes you also have to know when to scrap an idea and just nope, we're not using that anymore, even though a lot of people have a sunk cost. They're oh, well, we're into it, we got to do it, and it's really going to hurt you long term. Nope, just take it out.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had games that were in development that were I don't know, this could probably be 1 to 6 player or something, and then over the course of developing it, for the kids, they're nope, not 1 player, nope, not 6 player. And it comes up 2 to 5. Okay, so not 5, 2 to 4. All right, that'll sell. Yep.
Kind of similar to those questions. How do you know if you have some variations on how you play a game? Particularly, I'm thinking if it's not just you add more instructions, but you needed for this variation, you need another, small deck or another piece to make it more complicated. How do you know when you should do that versus when you should just say, hey, give me another $15 and start, buy my next version or I'll do some advanced. And I'm thinking of young, elementary age children's educational game, but family, that and up, but family educational game type things as a context for that question.
So what we try to do as a company is we try to design the most complete experience in the box that we can sell you. We do not design games with expansions in mind necessarily. Everybody now is expansion, not crazy, but people almost expect it. But we want to make sure that the product that we give you in the front is a complete experience that can stand on its own. Because if we bring that product to market and it doesn't sell, well, you're never going to get this other thing that is going to add to it. So if you try to go in knowing that the expansion is what you need to make the game better or right or fixed or whatever, you may never get to that point. Any expansions that we have, and we definitely do have expansions for a lot of our games, we feel bring something new and definitely add to the equation, but it's nothing that we said, oh, this is awesome, we'll sell it 3 years later. It's something that because of the success of the game we wanted to continue down that path and add more content to it later. I don't know if that helps exactly or not.
It does. I just have a quick follow-up. Do you ever find though that if you had to add extra stuff or pieces to make the second way of playing the game, maybe a more complicated way, maybe for older kids so that it fits both age groups, do you find that people get annoyed by saying, "Oh my gosh, there's a deck of cards here, I don't know what to do with," or
Well,
"I got extra
usually
dice, I
not.
don't use the dice for the way I'm planning to play"?
For us, usually not, because with our games, because they have the complete box in there, they understand what's happening and they have a good basis of how the game operates. So when we make an expansion, it's truly an expansion by name, is more things. So it's an expansion. It is another deck of cards. It is new dice. It is a new whatever. It's a new figure that does a cool thing. So they're expecting it to be in addition to what is already happening. So I think for our player base in particular, adding that new deck or that new figure or that new whatever is fine because they have a great solid base of knowledge from playing and enjoying the regular game that was a complete experience in the box.
So I would, in your case, to get at you, so we do a little bit different thing, but kind of thinking about it the same way, but coming to a different conclusion for our customer base. In your specific case, what I would do is have that core game experience, the simple version, be like, as long as what you're calling the simple version is a complete game experience and like, this is super fun and complete and everything is super cool right here, I would make that a thing. And then if you add more stuff to it, like later for advanced mode, it is like more complicated or whatever, I would put that over in an expansion, probably, if you're having a smaller game for that. But the line for when I do that depends on my audience. So if you're talking about like a game where it's gonna be more mass market, and you're gonna go to like an educational game, big box retailer, right? Then I would err in that direction. Like, I'm gonna make it so that there's nothing, so that people aren't confused and weirded out when they open the box. And we've gone to the point where, like, when we make a game anyway, maybe we do have an expansion for it or whatever. People that are in the core hobby that are like, I'm gonna make this game, and all the expansions are like, why don't you just design like the insert for the core game so I can put all the expansion stuff in there after I buy the expansions? And my answer is like, well, the insert in the core game, if this game I'm expecting to be in mass market or something like that, the insert for the core game is for the mass market customer who opens it and looks in. And if I have a bunch of extra little spots for stuff that they don't see in that game, that they can't even get because Target doesn't ever carry expansions or Barnes & Noble doesn't ever carry expansions or whatever, that's weird and confusing. So I'm not going to do that, right? But for a core hobby, maybe like the game is wildly popular, maybe I will like eventually publish a thing like, this is for you core hobby players who can put 10 expansions in one box. That'd be cool. Or a lot of core hobby players, like you know how to solve that problem. There's other companies out there that'll like make custom inserts and stuff.
And also some of it goes back to what we were saying earlier, is the cost. So is the cost of adding these additional components as an advanced rule set in the base game, is that cost too much, or is it not? Whatever it might be, these are things that you're going to think about. But also the expansion or the advanced mode, if it's a separate product for $5 or $10, like how does that compare to the other title? So if it's going to be $10 for this, it's probably only going to be $5 to jam it into this one.
Right.
So
that's kind of where
it
I'm
might
at.
take it might take your 20 to 30, but it's a much deeper experience.
Yeah.
You also see a significant drop off when you go to expansion mode.
Oh yeah.
So this is base game.
So better
These
just
are
make it,
these are expansions.
Yeah.
just better just make it advanced. And if a 12-year-old needs a game that includes dice, then the 5-year-old doesn't need a game that includes dice.
Right.
You know, you have some
Yeah.
instructions for the
Right.
Exactly.
If that's something that you think that like, so in order for this game to work for my target audience, it has to ultimately have all this stuff. It should all be in one box. If it's the kind of thing where like, okay, this core game is for mass market and stuff like that, and then for core hobby, there's all this other stuff. The other stuff will put in expansions for core hobby, and then the core thing I will have available for mass market, and then that's different depending on what the market is.
Traditionally loose numbers. Base game expansion is like a third or less of sales.
Yeah.
Usually less. A third is like, I'm being generous. So if you sell 9,000 of this, your ceiling is probably 3,000 of this. And then when you go down here, you're looking at like half or fewer of the previous number. So you're down in the 1,000 to 1,500 range. So that's why I say, as much as you can put in, you want to be happy with what goes up first and hope that it's a success, and then you can add more content. Because then it becomes a love and a passion for what you're doing instead of, I need to sell this, and I need to sell this, and I need to sell this, because it's going to go. Go ahead.
I was going to say my experience of that is the exception to that is if you make a heavily thematic game for core hobby, your expansion attach rate's going to be way higher. But good follow up or further.
This guy's been waiting.
Been waiting, yeah.
Okay, what's your thoughts on premium component add-ons? Is that something that you should ever consider or wait to see if the base game is popular?
We'll certainly do that. Yeah.
And again, there are different ways to go about it. When you look at things like Kickstarter, they piecemeal it because it's an end user shopping experience. The end user wants to buy this, and they also want to buy that, and they also want to buy this. But if you're trying to produce all those things without going that path and just put it into retail, that can be confusing for the end user. It's confusing. I used to own a store that sold games. It's confusing for the store. What do I need to own to sell to make sure my players are getting the game? And it's confusing for the players. What do I need to own to play this game? This map is separate. Do I have to buy this map to go with this? Oh no, it's just a $30 thing that is on a neoprene playmat. I don't actually need it. Why'd they do that? Why didn't they make better content for this? So it's a tricky thing to navigate. So in my opinion, premium content out the gate is probably not necessary.
So my experience of this is as a company, so I use Kickstarter all the time, but as a market research tool, that's not the majority of our revenue. And so I'm kind of like straddle the line there, and this is the way that's a little bit interesting sometimes. And so when I'm doing that, what I do and target at our Kickstarter audience is very different from what I'm going to be doing and targeting toward retail, right? And specifically how I will construct it is that if I'm doing something for Kickstarter, you might get this game and then all these Kickstarter rewards you unlock and there's all this different stuff and it's then user experience that you're really invested in and you can choose, like I want to play that and I want all these little bits and whatever like that, or I'm going to give them to you as stretch goals or whatever. What's going to come out of that though for retail is a core game that I can, if it's light enough, even maybe sell into mass specialty or something like that. An expansion, so like all the little stuff that you unlocked or whatever, that's just one retailable product that's easy to explain to a retailer that that's an expansion. And then if there's any other weird stuff, I won't even like tell retailers, it doesn't matter for retailers. Like your playmats and your art book and your fiddly bits, those are for Kickstarter. They were on Kickstarter. I might sell them at my booth at Gen Con, but other than that, like I'm not going to confuse a retailer with that. I'm going to give the retailer a really clean experience. Because think about it, like talking about owning a store, you think about you're going to be so busy and have so much stuff going on, and so many games come up all the time.
Last year, more than 7,000 games were released.
Right. Like, how do you figure out what to put in your store, right? The company that annoys you with all of their fiddly bits, you're just going to be like, too much work, not paying attention to them, I'm going to get more Star Wars stuff. Like, let's be honest.
Are there any final questions?
I have
Real
a
fast.
question about the components of polyhedral dice. Do you think those are something that are prohibitively expensive in board games, something that might be attractive to hobby gamers?
We don't do a lot of games with dice, so...
Yeah, so polyhedral dice, if they're standard polyhedral dice, are not very expensive. Like just standard, like this is a D20 that is numbered 1 through 20. There's so many factories now that just make those, that is fine. Once you start getting into custom engraving them, the cost does go up. One thing that's really interesting to note is the most expensive kind of die to custom engrave is a D10 because it doesn't sit flat in the holder in an engraving machine. So don't have custom engraved D10s. Have custom engraved D20, D8, D6, whatever, or do D10. Yeah.
You got it.
Sure. Back to manufacturing. I know Chinese New Year's a thing, but are there any other seasonal variances in buckets?
Yes. There's other holidays where the entire country turns off. And I always have to like stay up my friends and remind me when this holiday is coming up because it's not always synced up with the Western calendar. And so there is one in the fall. There's 4 a year basically, where like no one is at a factory for this.
And we don't face those issues because we manufacture in the Czech Republic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I think we're just about done with it. But like, if anyone has any more questions or wants to chat about it too, I'll be out there.